to another great episode of The Bourbon Road with your hosts, Jim and Brian, where they talk bourbon and, of course, drink bourbon. Grab yourself a pour, kick back, and enjoy another trip down the Bourbon Road.
We are excited to have back once again for 2023 our sponsor, Seldom Seen Farms, with their bourbon barrel-aged maple syrup. Kevin and his staff there do a wonderful job. We're excited to have them sign on again this year to support the Bourbon Road, and we love their product. And with it being Christmas season, we hope our listeners will visit seldomseenmaple.com and check out all they have to offer. A lot of great gifts there. Bourbon aged maple syrup, bourbon barrel aged coffee, Rickhouse Reserve barbecue sauce. You can buy it by the bottle, you can buy it by the case, you can even get bourbon maple candle, and they even have maple cotton candy. Definitely check out seldomseenmaple.com. Support our sponsors, support Kevin and his family there. They have a 5,000 maple tap operation in Ohio, and they're doing it right. They don't just produce maple syrup. They're also bourbon enthusiasts, and we love them to death. Again, go check out seldomseenmaple.com. Kevin and his staff will take care of you. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Road Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Shannon. In the studio with me today is Brian Hyatt, our co-host. Brian, welcome back for another episode. We've got a great day ahead of us here.
Thanks, Jim. I'm really looking forward to this. I got to tell you, this guest and the book is pretty amazing. So, super excited.
So, in the house today, our guest is a three-timer. He's appeared on the Bourbon Road twice before. He's back now. He's the only guest to have ever experienced a podcast on the Bourbon Road with each of our three co-hosts. So, pretty special. We'd like to welcome David Jennings from RareBird101. David, welcome to the Bourbon Road.
Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Now, each time we've had you on, it's because we had sort of let's say a qualifying event. That first time you had a user meet in Lexington, and
that's right.
You were doing some barrel picks, and Randy and I came down and joined you and recorded an episode there amongst all your ardent fans, right?
Yeah, it was a hell of a time. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good. The second time we had you on was when you released your first book, American Spirit.
That's right.
And that was a wild success. And now you've got a new book coming out.
Well, thank you.
And we're going to have you back again. So all great times, all great events, and always a good excuse to drink Wild Turkey whiskey.
Amen.
As we like to do, we like to get straight to that whiskey and not waste a whole lot of time, let everybody know what's in our glass. We kind of talked a little bit before the show and decided to pick one that we all had readily available. And David, what are we drinking in this first glass?
This is probably my whiskey of the year. And there's a lot to pick from this year, okay? But the return of Wild Turkey 101 12 year is a very big deal to me, because I think you look back historically on all the expressions that Wild Turkey has ever produced. It's up there, and, going from Beyond Duplication, Cheesy Gold Foil, Split Label, and then the export labels where you had like the pseudo split and the unilabel. It just has been quality whiskey every time. And yes, some are better than others. Some people have their favorite CGF, batch or whatever. And I get it. But every 12-year turkey, every 12-year 101 has been excellent. So there was a really high bar for this to come back to and line up with the past, which it did. To my not so much to my surprise, but to my delight.
To your delight.
I didn't know what I was going to get into here. I'm like, I knew it wasn't going to taste like dusty turkey. I mean, we all should have accepted that by now. Like, modern whiskey doesn't taste like dusty whiskey of any brand. So I knew that going into it, but it was, I was a little bit nervous on how good it might be. And when I finally tasted it, it was an instant win for me. I was like, this is, it couldn't have been any better. It has a profile that has a lot of, the best way to put it is it has a lot of commonality with Wild Turkey 101 in that it has the same bones. It has the caramel, the vanilla, the oak, and the spice and hints of citrus, right? But it's so much more mature, so much more complex and developed. It's a huge upgrade. So you're not going to taste the 101 profile, but it does taste like Wild Turkey. Like it's undeniable. But everything is just more complex. So like the vanilla is more like a vanilla bean, and the caramel is more like a caramel chew, and the oak is more like a robust, aged oak, well-aged oak, and then it also has like some leather and some medicinal cherry and some notes that you don't find necessarily in regular old 101. But this bottle sells for like $65 in Japan. And a little bit higher in Korea and Australia, depending on the day and where you get it from. And it's 700 milliliters, so it's 50 milliliters shy of a domestic 101 bottling. But comparing it to Russell's 13 and Master's Keep, I just think this one is not that it's better, but to me it deserves more accolades. Because it had an uphill battle here, because it hasn't been out for 10 years. And, to come back and to be such an impressive pour, I think it deserves a lot of praise. So there you go. For me, whiskey of the year is probably going to be 10112.
Wow, that's a surprise. I didn't expect that. And the reason I didn't expect that is because Brian and I haven't tasted it yet. Though this is a fresh crack. This is a fresh crack for us. Yeah, we just got the bottle. We just got the bottle 3 or 4 days ago. No, about a week ago, I guess. And so we're pretty excited to drink what you might call, the whiskey of the year. So
I hope you're not disappointed, because I know I really set it up for you there.
You did. I mean, I got goosebumps right now because I've got a pretty good pour here.
It's good. It's good stuff. Like I will say that to those listening who haven't tried it, if you did try the Master's Keep Bottled and Bond, imagine that, but sweeter. So it's like, it's not quite as much leather and oak. It's there. It's just dialed back a little bit. So it fits nice and snug between the 101 that you're used to and the Master's Keep Bottled and Bond. It's like right in the middle there. And it's just maybe leaning a little bit more towards the Bottled and Bond, but just a lovely, lovely complex profile.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and taste it.
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing to criticize about that whiskey right there.
No, it's really got a nice floral nose.
Yeah, it's impressive from nose to finish, and it's crazy that this is an expression that can be found overseas fairly cheap. I mean, cheap compared to a lot of other things.
Oh, gee, that's really good. Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit of cherry on the nose before I took my first sip, but that baking spice is really well rounded in there, I think.
Yeah, it's everything that anyone loves about 101, just with a huge upgrade.
Yeah, I'd have to say I agree. Now, 101 is kind of in my kitchen pantry all the time. That's my, I've got a bar downstairs, but I also keep a few bottles in my pantry because they need to be at hand. Mm-hmm. And Wild Turkey 101 is always there. Usually it's the only bottle in there, but sometimes I've got another one there. Sometimes another bottle in bond, like a JTS Brown or something easy and not too expensive. But I really love the brown sugar on the palate on this. It's I mean, the whole, I mean, obviously
the age is the big deal here, right? So you've got 12 years, and because it's 12 years, that doesn't mean that it's only 12 years. It could be 14-year, 15-year whiskey in here. You don't know. But it really gives it that depth that you don't get in 101. Like 101 is, don't get me wrong, domestic 101 is fantastic. It's the best workhorse whiskey out there. It holds up in blinds. You can use it for cocktails, cooking, mixing drinks, neat, whatever you want to do. It checks all those boxes. But as far as complexity goes, it really hovers around that traditional bourbon profile with your vanilla, your caramel, your baking spice, some oak, and maybe some citrus, hints of fruity notes there. Doesn't have a lot of the layers that you get in this 101-12. So you can really peel this like an onion. I mean, it's just molasses.
The clove and the leather notes like this has, when do those start to really show up?
The only way to really judge that would be to get some single barrels and like Russell single barrels and taste them as they progress. And a good way to do that is with Camp Nelson picks, because you can find them in 2018 that are 8 years, 2019 for 9, 2020 for 10, et cetera, et cetera. So you can take all those private selections of different ages, and as long as they're the same rickhouse and floor, so like Camp Nelson A or F, and you line up the different years and the floors and give yourself a kind of like a walk through time, you'll start seeing where the oak becomes a larger role in the profile and gives you those leather notes and the medicinal cherry notes. It's a fun thing to do, and I've done it before, just having a bunch of them around. I haven't sat down and said, okay, I'm going to map out, Camp Nelson F. But it's funny because with single barrels, they're not exactly the best way to do it because, one barrel can have qualities that maybe a barrel next to it didn't have. Sure. And I have tasted some CNFs that tasted almost over oaked at 10 years. And then I've tasted CNFs that are 12 plus years, and it's just perfect. So it's like you really don't know. But I think that traditionally, if you go back and you sip 101-12 year, doesn't really matter which whatever the label is, the oak has always been the backbone of the expression. You've had this sweet oak quality that brings with it notes like medicinal cherry and antique leather and tobacco and things like that. So I was glad when I first tasted this that it did that. Does it taste like 101-12 from 2012 or 2001 or 1991? No, it doesn't taste like those. But, you can taste a similar volume of oak influence and that it's matured, correctly. Like it wasn't just, well, let's just batch a bunch of 12-year whiskey or whatever, and, we'll just throw it out there. It was done right.
Yeah. Well, I know the finish seems to like go on forever on this. It's got kind of maybe a dried cherry and anise on the finish a little bit.
Like a licorice. Yeah.
Licorice or,
but it's never bitter.
No, it's definitely not bitter. And it's not really that drying either on the back end. You don't get that right. Kind of oaky dryness that you get from some older expressions. I think it is a well-balanced whiskey. It's something that I enjoy drinking. I can't really break it down beyond that. I just need to spend more time with it, but I'm pretty impressed by it, and I'm glad I got the bottle. I hope I can get another one because this is one of those. I was thinking, I got my Decades bottle a while back, and I've managed to revisit it on rare enough occasions where I still have half the bottle. So it's nice when you have something in your library, you can go back and try again. There's always that sinking feeling when something's gone forever and you can't taste it anymore. So.
Right. And what's interesting about Decades is that's kind of, it's funny because, we have Russell's Reserve single rick house, right? So single rick house is like the big release this year is $250, giving you that DNA snapshot of what a single aging location at Wild Turkey produces, which I think is a really cool idea, and I'm glad they did that. But in a way, Decades is not necessarily single rick house, but it's almost single rick house. It was McBrayer. So the barrels aged at McBrayer, which I think there's 3 standing and 2 that they're really using. So, it's like double rick house.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it gives you a interesting profile because of that. So you taste Decades, and obviously it tastes like Wild Turkey, but it has its own unique characteristics that make it taste different from this 10112. That's not just age; it's a lot to do with where it was aged at.
Well, Dave, there's probably a lot of people listening to this episode right now who are pretty familiar with you, your blog, your books, your appearances on a number of podcasts. But there's also going to be a few people who are saying, who's David Jennings? Who's RareBird101? I mean, I hear him talking about Wild Turkey here, but where did this guy come from? So my question to you is, what's that 10,000 foot view? Who is David Jennings, and where did it all start?
Well, I mean, in a nutshell, today, I consider myself an author, a writer, a whiskey enthusiast, a Wild Turkey super fan. That's who I am. I don't consider myself an expert. I'm not formally educated in whiskey. I came into this hobby like most people do, which is just going online and reading about various expressions or having some friends share pours with you. And it, kind of stirs up interest, and you have to kind of satisfy that interest. So you go to the liquor store and you try different things, and, you make wise purchases and you make unwise purchases. And, that's kind of how it all began for me, was just, having some whiskey with my brother-in-law. And after years of drinking whiskey in a mixed drink, I tried it on the rocks and loved it. Did not miss having Coke in it or ginger ale, and decided I was going to go find the best whiskey, and went on this search, this voyage that we all take to try to find the best whiskey in the world. Of course, that doesn't really exist, because everyone's got their own personal preferences. So there is no best whiskey in the world. The best whiskey in the world is whatever makes you happy at the time. It's relative. It's not a finite thing. So after some time exploring various whiskeys, I found Reddit's Our Bourbon Forum, because I'd kind of started leaning towards bourbon as what I considered kind of my favorite of the whiskeys I had tried out of Scotch, Irish, Canadian, whatever, and started writing reviews for Reddit. And I had a different handle at the time, but I mean, I was reviewing anything I could find, and found myself really enjoying Wild Turkey because it was a surprise. Because I remembered Wild Turkey. I went to college in the mid 90s. And at that time, Wild Turkey that was what you did, before you went out for the night. You had Wild Turkey 101 shots, and it wasn't, in my mind, a whiskey that one might enjoy, in a formal sense. And I tried it because I picked up like a little bottle at checkout with the intention of reviewing it and probably destroying it, giving it a negative review because it was going to be rot gut or something. And turns out I was mistaken, very much so. And I enjoyed it more than a lot of the other whiskeys I paid a lot for.
Sure.
And I was like, wow, I've got to get more of this. And I started talking about it, and people were chiming in. And one kind person, internet stranger, had asked me if I had tried Dusty Turkey. And of course I said no, at least not in the sense that he meant, because I had it in college, but he sent me some samples. It was a 1981 1018 year, which sounds like you've got one of those, Jim.
Yeah.
And you lucky bastard. And I've got, and then he sent me a 92 Cheesy Goldful 101 year. And both of those just sent me down a path of just wanting to find that profile again. And of course I tried, and of course you're not going to find that dusty profile on the shelf. I didn't know that at the time, but it doesn't matter, because what I found were profiles that I enjoyed. So got into Russell's picks and the ryes, from Single Barrel Rye and 101 Rye. And I just went through the whole catalog and started writing a lot of Wild Turkey reviews. And next thing you know, that's like all I was reviewing on Reddit was Wild Turkey. And I thought, well, I probably ought to archive these somewhere, because it's like I've got this collection, of Wild Turkey. And I probably had about 24, 25 reviews. And I started a blog on WordPress and uploaded all those Reddit reviews and added some pictures for the ones I didn't have pictures for. And it just kind of started getting attention. I guess people were searching for Wild Turkey reviews, and it grew faster than I ever imagined. Like, it wasn't my intention to have I wasn't trying to be Breaking Bourbon or something. It was just, I was just putting them out there, and it got some attention. And then I decided, well, maybe I ought to start kind of doing some things on social media. So I started an Instagram, and then eventually I started Twitter, and the number of people following grew, and built this network of turkey fans, and we started trading samples and trying things I'd never tried before. And people would see I had holes in my reviews, like, well, you must not have ever reviewed this one. Do you want to review it? And they would send me samples of things I probably would never get my hands on. And started a Patreon, and that has grown over time. And here I am now. I've got 2 books under me, and a lot ahead that I'm working on, and never imagined that this is what I'd be doing full time, but it is. And I owe a lot of thanks to the people that have supported me through the years for making that possible. Like this podcast. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the overview.
Oh, David, I've got kind of a quick question for you, and then I know Brian's got a couple of things, but
okay.
My quick question has to do with your first few Reddit posts. When you first started posting your thoughts on tastings on Reddit,
okay,
how was that for you? Was that like a liberating experience? Was that tensive?
No, okay. So the very first thing I reviewed, if I recall correctly, was Smooth Ambler Old Scout 10-year. This is back when you could find the good stuff. Nothing against Smooth Ambler now, but you have to admit the stuff that they were cranking out from the beginning, that was, from MGP, was amazing. Yeah. So it was a Smooth Ambler Old Scout 10-year. And I remember doing the tasting notes and feeling like I was a dumbass, because I was reading like Whiskey Advocate and just various whiskey books, and all these folks had these really fancy tasting notes, and I couldn't relate to any of that. Like, I didn't know what, this certain flower from the Amazon jungle smells like or whatever. Like, none of that stuff, a certain brand of peppermint from like France, whatever. I don't get those things. Like, to me, it's very simple stuff, like things I can relate to, like things that I've consumed and smelled my entire life, So vanilla I can relate to, cornbread and maple syrup, and these types of notes are things. And sometimes I get wacky notes, like I don't know, like a certain type of plastic or whatever. It's you just what you can only put what you can relate to. So anyway, yeah, I felt inadequate. Like, I felt like my tasting notes were really, poor man tasting notes.
Is it a little bit of imposter syndrome, maybe?
Yeah, like I felt like I didn't belong in that circle. Like I'm an intruder. But I put it out there. And with each review, I felt more and more confident that how I was describing the whiskey was right, or at least right for me. So, I encourage anyone out there that's interested in, reviewing a whiskey or providing tasting notes, don't be afraid to just say exactly what you feel, and don't feel like you have to name 10 notes either. Like, if all you get on the nose is vanilla and that's it, then just say, I get a big, smell of vanilla, and like, let that be your note. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's real.
It's real. And really what matters most is explaining to the reader how you feel about it, because you can list 1,000 notes and at some point in time, it's just a sea of adjectives and verbs. It's like, there's nothing really like, or adjectives and nouns, I should say, maybe the occasional verb, but like, it's, you get lost in it. Does anyone really take tasting notes that seriously either? Like, it gives you a snapshot of what you might taste, but it's not like, you're like, this is the Bible truth of this whiskey. Like, I never read a review and think these are the exact notes I'm going to get. It's always kind of like, okay, I get where you're going with this. I see a lot of citrus stuff on here, so it must have a really citrusy vibe. How do you feel about it? And that matters just as much, if not more, than your tasting notes. So if you're, just starting out doing whiskey reviews, don't get too caught up in the notes thing. Don't try to like, describe things in ways that are foreign to you. Just describe it as best you can. And then tell people how you feel about it, because that's where they're really going to, kind of lock in with you or disagree with you. And that's another thing too, is it's okay for people to disagree with you. Don't feel like you have to defend your review. If you really, really like a whiskey and other people hate it, that's cool. That's fine, And the inverse is true. So if you really hated a whiskey and everybody else loves it, I mean, if you're being honest, that's the truth. You're not wrong. So anyway, just be tough and stand by your opinion.
Yeah, David, I think that a lot of people can really get on board with that, and it probably makes people feel, a lot more confident when they do speak up, because a lot of times you get in certain settings and you want to make sure that you're not missing the mark. And I've been in a lot of different settings and had the fortune of tasting some very old Dusties, and you hear all these different notes and everything. And sometimes, you just, like you said, you pick up something very simple, and either you like it or you don't like it. And it can be a very uncomfortable situation for some folks. And as they continue to taste and get more comfortable with it, you tend to relax a little bit, and some other things start popping out, and you can speak a little bit more to those things. So, yeah. So I think our listeners probably love hearing that, and it just gives them, the ability to know that they can jump in and do different things with tasting and not be worried about missing the mark.
Right. And I mean, the more you do it, the more confident you'll get. And a good way to do that too is to explore like really wildly different things. Like go from like a peated Scotch, to like like a super sweet bourbon, and they're totally different, and you're going to get totally different notes. Or like something that's finished, like something that's finished in, I don't know, like a VDN or sherry or rum or something, where you're going to get these extremely different notes from an expression or a style, a spirit style that you're used to. Or you could even like just really get outside of it and do something that's not even whiskey. Like you could, try tequila or, cognac or whatever. And like these things help your palate kind of like figure out, how notes come across differently. So like a grape note that you might get in a bourbon is not going to be necessarily the same grape note that you might get in a cognac. or the sugar cane that you get in a rum, like a heavy syrupy sugar, is not the same syrupy sugar that you might get in a bourbon where you might describe it as syrupy sugar, but it's not exactly the same. But just having your palate explore different spirits and different styles of whiskey, different ages of whiskey, different finishes, all that kind of stuff will help you express those tasting notes the more you do it. So just an idea. That's how it's helped me.
I definitely agree with that. I think one of the first ones that I kind of branched out on was Ron Zacapa XO rum. And that one kind of, it was kind of a curveball for me. Somebody threw it in a blind tasting, and we had everything lined up was bourbon except for that. And it really does take you down a different road, and you do start to pick out different flavor profiles when you do that. So
yeah, and I used to not like rum at all. Like I was just not a rum fan, and it wasn't that long ago when I started kind of veering that direction and going, I do find some redeemable qualities in this. And turns out what it was is, not all rums are created equal, just like all whiskeys aren't created equal, but even more so with rum because of dosing and these types of things where you have to kind of get a little bit more nerdy and figure out, well, these are the ones that are going to be more what you're probably going to appreciate over the others. So once I started, I think it was a real McCoy 12-year that was like the first one I tasted. I was like, oh, this kind of has some dusty bourbon qualities to it. And I was getting some of that same kind of like cellar oak, fermented fruit, that proverbial dusty funk. And so that turned me on that. I still haven't gotten into tequila. I've tasted tequila. I've tried. I should probably keep trying, but so far to date, I'm kind of railing Givens on the tequila. So not really my thing yet, but maybe one day.
I think Brian and I both love to drink a little tequila. I always say that gin is my other bourbon. I love gin. And I don't know why. I think it's because of the variety of florals that can be introduced to it. But everybody has their other bourbon, I guess. And maybe it sounds like your other bourbon might be rum or maybe even a Scotch whiskey, huh?
No, I think if like bourbon just disappeared suddenly, well, let's just say whiskey disappeared, because I would just go to rye if bourbon disappeared. But like, so let's say, it disappeared. I would definitely move probably to Armagnac next, or French brandy, Cognac, Armagnac, even Calvados, would probably be the second thing for me. And then third would be like Jamaican rum, like a funky rum.
Wow. Cool. Awesome. Well, I tell you what, I just finished off my pour of this 2022 Export 12 year, and man, it's delicious. I am so glad I still have like 2/3 of a bottle here after I shared out some samples, because I'm going to visit this on occasion. I hope it doesn't disappear too quick. Now let's talk a little bit about acquiring a bottle of this, right? It's not easy to get.
No.
You say it's $65 or so
Japan,
overseas.
Right.
But by the time you fly there, or you have a friend ship it to you, taking those chances to get it overseas, it gets quite a bit more expensive. So what would you say is a reasonable price for somebody to pay to get there?
I mean, I would say, okay, so you're getting 700 milliliters as opposed to 750 in a domestic bottling. And Master's Keeps are going for $200 now, basically. Yeah. I think that if you're under 200, it's probably worth buying. I would say I would feel comfortable more in the 120 to 150 range would be something that like I would not have a problem coming off that to buy a bottle at all. Once you start getting over 150, it gets to be, okay, how desperate am I to have this? But certainly crossing that $200 mark, and I think that's a little bit too much, in my opinion. So,
well, David, you validated my purchase because I spent $149, so I feel like I just got inside the the reasonable range there.
So you must have got. Did you pick it up at Neat?
I did. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I thought that was a very fair price. So yeah, you did good. And it's worth it, in my opinion. I mean, the profile speaks to that. If it didn't, I would not recommend people picking it up, but it does.
All right. Well, it's been a great first half, David. You've really given us kind of this view into your sort of where you come from, and in the second half, we'd like to obviously pour some more whiskey, but talk a little bit more about kind of what you got going on now and what's happening in your world and what we can plan on for the future. So let's take a short break, and we come back, folks. More of David Jennings and RareBird 101. Definitely encourage you to check out seldomseenmaple.com. That's Seldom Seen Farms. Kevin and his staff there are doing a fantastic job. And like we said at the beginning of the show, they've got a 5,000 maple tap operation. They're a first-generation farm with a passion to produce the very best maple products available. They've won so many awards, and they have a very special, unique aging method for their syrup and for their barrel-aged coffee. They provide quality at a very affordable price. They're not a maple factory or a co-packer. Kevin and his staff there are farmers with a passion for maple. Like I said before, Kevin is a bourbon enthusiast. He's not just a paid sponsor. He's a friend of the show. He's a roadie, and he loves helping roadies get down the bourbon road. Make sure you check out seldomseenmaple.com. They're constantly producing great bourbon-aged maple syrups using barrels from the very best distilleries. They also return those barrels to the distilleries afterwards. Distilleries like New Riff, Leaper's Fork, Treaty Oak Distilling, the Bard Distillery, Pine Bluffs Distilling, Mystic Farm and Distillery, J. Riger. So many more to come. Kevin and his staff there are just spreading the love, spreading the maple syrup, making it happen. And at the end of the day, those barrels that age that maple syrup get refilled with some wonderful bourbon and make some great maple finished bourbon whiskey. How awesome is that? Definitely check out seldomseenmaple.com. Get you some. So we are back. This is a fantastic episode. We got David Jennings in the house from RareBird 101. In the first half, we got a chance to sip on a little bit of Wild Turkey 101 12-year, the export for 2022. David called that out as possibly his pour of the year, right?
Yeah, whiskey of the year, possibly.
Wow. Means it's high on the list to become that, right?
Yeah, it's up there with like the new Master's Keep.
Yeah, awesome. Well, in the second half, it's going to be tough to beat, but I think we all have a different pour to drink from.
Yep.
And I guess we'll just each take turns and talk about what we're drinking. I'll start with you, David.
Okay, so I'm sipping on a barrel that I helped pick at Wild Turkey. It's a Russell's Reserve selection. It's called Lawrenceburg and Loretto. And this was selected with some of my Patreon supporters, as well as Denny Potter, Jane Bowie, Trevor Bowles from Maker's Mark, or I guess Denny and Jane formerly of Maker's Mark, Ryan Alves of Justin's House of Bourbon, and Pablo Moy from Rare Character, along with Bruce Russell. And it's a 10-year Rickhouse E 4th floor barrel. And just has this really complex very unique profile in comparison to like your kind of core turkey, I guess you would say. All those Rickhouse e-barrels that came out in 20 were very different. They had like really kind of strange notes like tropical fruits and Fruit Loops and juicy fruit gum and all kinds of oddities. And this is that same whiskey, but with another 2.5 years to it, or two to 2.5 years added to it. And it's really, it rounded off some of those kind of brighter, sharper edges of like the tropical fruit, which kind of brings it down more into like an orchard fruit or like a blood orange and these types of things. And then I even get some chocolate on this. I got a lot of chocolate in the Rickhouse whenever we picked it, as did Jane. But with the water added, it's kind of changed a little bit because, these are bottled at 110, so it's not full barrel proof. But it's still there. It's a milk chocolate note. Just imagine like if you open, you get those Valentine candy boxes in the heart box, whatever. And it's the variety pack, where you have like the everything, like the dark chocolate, the milk chocolate, the fruity stuff, the cream stuff, the nutty stuff, all of it in there, right?
Yeah.
But you know what it smells like when you first break the cellophane wrap and you open that box and you get that smell? Mm-hmm. That's what this nose is like. It's like chocolate, fruity, nutty, just some of everything, creamy, all in that nose. And it was my favorite that day, outside of a almost 13-year barrel that Justin's ended up getting, because as bad as I wanted it, it just didn't have a yield to it because Bruce could barely thief the whiskey. It was like there was so little bourbon in the barrel. I was like, well, I didn't want to waste, a barrel allocation on something that 30 patrons might get.
Sure.
I passed on it, but this was my favorite of that day. And as well as Jane, it was her favorite. And, it's a special whiskey to me because there's a lot of memories associated with it. And just had a hell of a trip. That this was selected in March of this year. And
must have been kind of a unique situation to have Denny and Jane there for makers.
It really was neat. It's hard to explain. I mean, they're so normal, but I mean, like normal, it's kind of a bad word, but
those two are off the hook.
When I say normal, I mean like they're just average, like folks. Like they're not. They don't come across like snooty or I'm a master distiller, I'm a master taster, or whatever. There's none of that there at all. They're just like they're just as excited about doing the turkey barrel pick as me and stuff. It's like we're all just like shooting the shit and having a great time. And it was a wonderful day. And what made it even cooler was like the distillery was closed, so everything was locked up. Jimmy had to come let us in. So Jimmy had to go like to the security and let us in. And he drives down to the Rickhouses and he meets us down there, and we chit chat with him for a little while before we head on in. So it was a really special day. And I felt like I was, even though I was with some folks I'd known for only a short period of time and some folks I had just met that day, I felt like I was with old friends. Like I felt like I knew Denny and Jane for years, even though I had just met them that day. And it was a hell of a time.
I think they have that effect on people. And the other thing about Denny and Jane is they really feed off each other, right? They really they can really get going, and they're picking at each other, but at the same time they're having fun, right?
It happened quick. It was like it was like it wasn't one of those ease in things. It was like they were just full on. We were all buddies very quickly. Yeah. It was a hell of a time. Like I said, I enjoyed every minute of it. Wish I could go back and relive it.
Well, Brian, what do you got in your glass?
I have the Kentucky Spirit from 2019, Warehouse K, Rick number 6. And so this is one that obviously I'd have it's a great bottle, but I've had it sitting on the shelf for quite a while. Never cracked it until the day after Thanksgiving this year. So decided to jump into it, and Jim was over at my house, and we were able to taste that together. So very cool bottle. Really enjoyed it. It's going a little bit faster than I would like it to go at this point, but that's for a very good reason. A little bit, that I've been able to pick out from this bottle is just that, it's obviously has its oak flavors and everything. The orange pill is a little bit something that jumps out to me that I don't always pick up in other bottles, but in this one, I definitely do. So I feel like it's a great drink. I really enjoy it, and compared to the other Kentucky spirits I've had, I actually like this one a little bit more than the others.
Awesome. Something about Rickhouse K. It's what I call like the wild card Rickhouse. So you can get notes that you're talking about, like citrus notes. You can get like wild berry notes. I've had K barrels that come across very like raspberry, cranberry type. And then I've had some that are just super dark and rich and, toasted brown sugar and molasses. It's quite the interesting aging location because you never really know what you're going to get. And another throwback to, Jim, you had mentioned the other episodes I've been on. I don't know if you remember this or not, but, Randy and you and I were sipping a Whiskey Bear Russell's Reserve from Rickhouse K.
Yes.
Back in that first episode. So that's kind of a cool little tie-in there.
Absolutely.
That was a good pick too. Damn, that was a good pick.
Yeah. I've had some pretty phenomenal picks from there that just blow my mind. I've never had anything that was subpar ever.
That was a killer. When I had to go, like after we did that episode, I had to get one. So it was great. And because there were some heavy pours that day. I don't know if you remember. I mean, we had some killer stuff. We had like Split Label, 12 year, CGF. We had Dusty 1018. We had Single Cast Nation stuff. Like we had a lot of good stuff that day. And for
Beyond
that
duplication you had there. I mean, There were some things there were just phenomenal. Things that I'd never had an opportunity to try before. And your crew there, let's just call them your crew. They were very generous in sharing what they had.
Oh, yeah.
You'd brought a lot too. So it was pretty nice.
Everybody pitched in, and some of the stuff that people were bringing. Like I remember Scott Early brought like Sherry's Signature, and I think he brought the 101 17 year, from 2001. Just stuff that like nowadays would fetch a pretty hefty price tag.
Sure.
And people were just sharing it among each other. It was a great night. We had another meetup this year, and it was even more folks, and the same kind of thing, just people being very generous with their whiskey. And that's the best part about this hobby is how it's more about, taking a special whiskey and giving it to other people so that they can experience what you've experienced. And like seeing that smile on their face or getting that feedback from them and not worrying about, well, gosh, they're probably sipping about $50 right now. Like that doesn't even cross your mind because you're more interested in, having that person feel that same, sense of satisfaction that you did when you've tasted it. So that's the best thing about the hobby is the friendship, the fellowship, people being generous and sharing, and it's awesome. I mean, the flipping stuff, the money stuff, whatever, this is where it's at.
I mean, if you're buying bottles and they end up on your shelf gathering dust and you don't really ever want to open them because you're scared to crack the seal on it, there's not a lot of fun in that.
Nope.
Maybe the thrill of the hunt to get it, but then it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're sipping on those bottles by yourself and enjoying them, you get that pleasure of the taste, but you don't get the pleasure of sharing that with others. I mean, the ultimate good feelings, the ultimate gratification comes when you pour somebody else something from a bottle you have that you know they're likely not to get, and they get to experience that. I mean, that's it. That's where it happens. That's where the magic happens for me.
Yep.
It really does.
That's true. And while I get that, like, I don't feel like everyone should have to like open every bottle that they have. Like, I know there's people out there that like peer pressure and they're like, well, you need to open it. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you can't open every single bottle that you have, especially when you get to like a level of having 150 plus bottles. You know, you don't want to open every one of them because, you know, you want them to, you can only drink so much. I mean, you only got one liver, you know? So I have no problem with people saving bottles for special occasions or meetups or whatever. Sealed bottles aren't bad things, but, you know, if you're not sharing your whiskey, whatever whiskey you have that you're, you know, currently enjoying, then you're missing out. Because there's a lot more fun stuff that happens in fellowship than you'll ever have, like you said, by yourself. So, and some of the best pours I've had by myself are like everyday stuff. You know, it's like, you know, like, damn, this 101's kicking ass tonight, you know? And like, sometimes that is like the best feeling in the world, isn't it? Like, I tell you, so right now, for those listening, if you want to go into a store and have like this feeling of like, you know, like being on top of the world, go into the liquor store and look around. Of course, if they have something cool that you want to try or something allocated that you lucked out on or whatever, by all means get it if you're paying a good price, whatever. But 9 times out of 10, when you go in, it's the same old stuff you see every time, right? Well, if you want to go in and feel like a winner, go in, buy a handle of Wild Turkey 101 and tell me that doesn't feel good walking out with that. Like, there's just something about walking out of a liquor store with a handle of Wild Turkey 101 that just, I mean, that's just win. That's just a win. I mean, you know, so anyway, just a suggestion for those out there.
All right. So what I have in my glass is the Master's Keep Bottle and Bond 17 year. And this is something that I'm getting. I've got maybe an ounce left. So I put a pretty healthy pour in this glass.
Wow.
And then I got maybe an ounce remaining, and then I'll be done with it. But that's okay. I may or may not find another bottle of it. Sometimes you find this stuff out there, like I was saying earlier.
You can get lucky.
Yeah, you can get lucky. For me on this one, it's kind of a grilled cherry. The citrus is a little light on it for me, but it is smoky. It's got that smoky nose to it.
Yep, a lot of char.
For the palate, I get Whorehound Candy, and I know, listeners, I say Whorehound Candy a lot, but anytime I get that root beer or sassafras kind of note, I like to say Whorehound, because Whorehound is just one of my favorites. You know,
you can find it at Cracker Barrel.
You can't find it at Cracker Barrel. That's true. I get a little bit of orange on it, orange peel, if you want to call it that, but a little bit more on the palate than I got on the nose from the citrus on the nose. And then I get this. So, you know, when you eat a creme brulee, you got that crust on top.
Yep.
Okay. Just the crust, not the creamy custard underneath, but just the crust on top.
Yeah.
I think the finish is probably just medium on this, but it's medium to long, maybe.
Yeah.
I really love it. Yeah, it's a good whiskey.
Is one of the best things that Wild Turkey's ever bottled, ever. And that's surely one of the best things that Eddie has ever been involved in. Like, if you want to talk about crowning achievements of Eddie Russell, that Bottled and Bond Master's Keep is way up there. Like, probably right under 1998, like Russell's 1998.
Yep.
As far as, you know, bearing Eddie's name, really knocked it out of the park with that one. Now, granted, you have to like a mature whiskey. So if you don't like mature whiskey, it's probably not going to be your jam, because there is a lot of oak to it.
There is,
but it's done right. And you know, I really should stress that to folks out there, is that, like, it's okay to not like mature whiskey. Like, I think some people, you know, they've kind of have this in their mind that the older the whiskey, the better. And that is not necessarily true. Jimmy would tell you that that's not true, you know? But if you do like an older whiskey, if you like that, you know, heavy, like you're talking about sassafras and antique leather and charred oak, if those notes speak to you, then mature whiskey is where it's at. The trick is having a mature whiskey that retains a sweetness that isn't bitter, that isn't drying, that doesn't leave you needing a sip of water after you've tasted it.
Sure.
Doesn't taste like pencil shavings or anything like that. So, and that's hard to do with bourbon. It's not like Scotch where you have the environment where the stuff can sit in, and they can use barrels that have X barrels, X bourbon, X sherry, whatever. It's tricky. Kentucky has a climate where it gets very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter, and it really burns through that wood, and so bourbon doesn't do so well as it gets in the teens, and you have to really keep an eye on it and move them to lower floors and baby those barrels. It's not either you get lucky or you're mindful, but it's one of the two.
Yeah, I think if you can get your hands on a bottle of this, you should definitely grab it. If you can get it at retail or close to retail. I mean, the cherry survives all the way to the finish, and you get a little bit of burnt marshmallow, and I just like it. And you're right, it's not overly drying at the end. It's not like that's a song that plays over and over again with older whiskeys as they get that dry finish on them.
Yep.
And this is just wonderful. It's really good. And I'm sad to see. Well, I'm sad to see that last ounce sitting there, but I'm going to enjoy that last ounce for sure.
Save it for something special.
I will. All right, David. Well, in the second half, we kind of like to talk a little bit more about what our guest has going on today and what's exciting in their lives and their brand and the work that they do. And we all know that you have a new book coming out that has had an initial release, but kind of a limited release, and it's on pre-order now. But can you tell us a little bit about your new project?
Yeah. Okay. So about 2 years ago, I started thinking about what am I going to do for the 5th anniversary of my blog, because I started the blog in 2016. And, a lot of people, they'll do things like a single barrel bottling or, maybe like a party or something, And I was trying to figure out what am I going to do. And I got to looking at, my work over the years. And I had, at that time, when I was looking at my blog, I had over 300,000 words worth of material there. And I thought, well, surely, there is 50,000 words in here that are worthy of kind of memorializing in print. And I took the idea in a lot of ways from Chuck Cowdery, because Chuck has some books that are compilations of blog posts, or compilations from the Bourbon Country Reader or whatever. And so I felt like I could do this, but if I'm going to do it, I didn't want to just regurgitate stuff that anyone could just find online. I wanted to kind of make it special. So I thought, okay, well, I'll talk to Vic about doing some new photography, and I'll go through each post, and not only will I edit it, I'll kind of add my director's cut to it. So I'm putting my notes and the story behind the post, or maybe a story about what happened after I posted it, or why I even wrote it in the first place. So that's what became Wild Turkey Musings. And I put a Kickstarter out there last year and said, hey, I want to do this book for, the 5th anniversary of my blog. And the response was overwhelming. I mean, I had a greater fundraiser than I did for my first book, American Spirit. And so I knew when that happened, I really had to dial up the quality. I'm like, okay, well, this is a lot more people interested in this than I thought there would be. So now I really got to make sure that it's special. So I talked to Ricky, who designed the first book, and even though he did not work for the publisher, my publisher anymore, I wanted to use him. And I told Ricky that I have this vision. My son, there was this pirate book that I used to read to him as a kid, and it had this look to it. And I want to make this whiskey book look like that pirate book without being a pirate book. And he did an incredible job designing a book that had that feel, where it was like a journal, where it was like very informal, without being overdone. And I talked to Vic when we got to the point about photography, and I said, look, love what you did with American Spirit. I want you to do a different angle with this one. I want you to like think about things a little bit less formal, less catalog shots, and more artistic shots, more shots where other people can kind of relate to them, like maybe at home or in a hotel room or something like that. Then at the same time, I want them to be high quality, which of course Vic is only going to provide something like that. So, I had just a good team, and I had a lot of folks help me with editing. Taylor Cope, who writes and edits Malt Review, he kind of went through the first round of editing, and then I had a team of several editors at my publisher go through it. What ended up becoming, Wild Turkey Musings is really a celebration of everything I've done the last 5 years, and it turned out better than I could have ever imagined it. Artistically, stylistically, it just, thanks to some really talented individuals, this turned out better than I envisioned it. Like this is not the book that you have. If you have Musings, or if you're thinking about getting it, it is so much better than I ever imagined. I mean, I remember being on a barrel pick and in Kentucky, and I was getting on a plane to come home, and Ricky sent me a text with some screenshots of the layout and Vic's pictures. It was the first time I saw what the book was going to look like, and I'm on the plane and I get this text and I open it up, and I mean, like, I almost kind of cried a little bit. Like, I was just like, damn, this is like really looking good. Like, this is like you have something in your head, but translating that to print is very difficult sometimes. And for someone to be able to do that, and do it better than I imagined it, it really just made me happy. And I was just like, okay, this is going to be good. People are going to like this. Because I worried so much from the first day of doing this, would this, I just didn't want it to be like a regurgitation of my blog, because what's the point in buying a book if like I can go out and get the material for free? And it turned out just so wonderful. I'm just very, very, very happy. And it's not just my author's notes in there. Like, I mean, I've got an introduction and an epilogue and a prologue that are, completely new material. And then Fred's got a forward in there. Fred Minnick wrote the forward. And I've included some other little gems in there. The book is somewhat interactive too. Like, so there's places for you to fill in the blanks. Like, you can list your favorite whiskeys, or, kind of jot in your favorite cocktail, or just various places in the book. There's some maps there. Connor Query had done some watercolor paintings for me based on some maps that Bo had actually created. Bo Garrett had created of all the Rickhouse campuses. And so she turned those into watercolors, and then Ricky was able to kind of transform those into like these maps that kind of work in that pirate book style. That it all just worked out. And that's awesome. I'm sitting here like gushing about my own book. I should be embarrassed to do that, but it just turned out so much better than I thought it would. And to clarify, yes, the site says it's on pre-order. The release is technically February 2023 because of how publishing works, because you have to get these books into certain distributors that get them to certain stores. And so like the mom and pop Amazon type of release is February 2023. But I told my publisher, like, this is something I want people to have now, because I've got Kickstarter supporters, I've got Patreon supporters, I've got people that follow me on social media. And to be honest, the 5th year anniversary occurred in 2021. Here we are, 2022. I don't want to be 2023 for the 5th anniversary release. So if you order it through my publisher, which you can get that link through wildturkeybook.com, but my publisher's Mascot Books, they're also under an imprint called Amplify Publishing. But if you order it through my publisher, the book will mail the next day. So you buy it, today, they'll mail it tomorrow. and you'll have it then. If you wait and you just have to buy it on Amazon, well, you're going to have to wait till February. But if you want it now and you buy it from a publisher, it says pre-order, but if you buy it from them, you'll get it shipped out immediately. Also, ebooks are available through my publisher. If you purchase the ebook for a single $9.99 purchase, you get all three formats. You get PDF, you get iBooks, which is Apple, and you get the Kindle version, which is Amazon.
Yeah. So, David, Brian and I have spent the week reading your book, and he's a speed reader. I'm not such a speed reader. He's gotten through your book, and I'm about 70 pages in. But I just have one comment, and that is that it's amazing with a book of musings. This is a retrospective, right? This is you looking back and saying, these are all the things that have brought me to where I am, and you're sort of bearing your soul in a lot of this, but the flow between one musing to the next is just so seamless. It just sort of,
thank you.
It's almost, that's what I noticed early on, is that this transition between one story to the next is just so comfortable.
That was the most difficult part. It really was. Like writing about the post, doing my author's notes, that was pretty easy because you just tell the truth. Like, this is what I was doing at the time, or this is how I felt at the time. And the words just come. But having to cut posts and add posts, it was so difficult. Like, there were posts I left out that I wanted to be in there, but they just didn't fit the flow. Like, there was one, a post I have that's called Drink Shaming and the Iced Turkey Yeti or something like that. Like, I really like that post because I really hate drink shaming. I feel like drink shaming is like the worst part of our hobby, and outside of counterfeit. And but I didn't include it because it kind of interrupted things. It didn't really like flow with the turkey conversation. And there were some other ones too I had to cut. I debated on cutting the best of posts because I worried that they would be redundant. Like, it would be like, okay, here we are, just going through the list of the best of again. But at the same time, I had people reach out to me and say, when you do your book, please do the best of posts in there. And I got to thinking about it. I'm like, it's a good way to kind of snapshot where Turkey was at the time, in a very critical time in its life, because we're coming out of Campari purchasing Wild Turkey out of some, nothing against Pernod, but some rather stale years there towards the end with a Pernod ownership. And, I think it was important to kind of show how a lot of these expressions that people knew on a regular basis back then had now become something even greater now. And then the addition of all new lines like Master's Keep and various Russell's expressions that were new, like the rye, single barrel rye. I think that it was important to have those in there, as well as some of these one-off things or annual things like single cask nation. These are important expressions because Turkey doesn't bottle single barrels at barrel proof. So, people need to know that these things exist, whether they had a chance to taste them or not. It was very, very, very difficult picking out which pieces would I use and which would I not. And I went through Jim, I probably went through 3 or 4 versions of the book as a manuscript before I finally had one that I could send to Fred, that I felt comfortable with Fred reading it and, wanting to do a forward or I asked him. And, honestly, how that went down too was, I'd asked Fred to do the forward for American Spirit, and I just didn't hear back from him. And, Aaron Goldfarb has done a lot of great stuff for me over the years. And so I reached out to Aaron, and he was like, man, I'd love to. And then after the book came out, Fred was like, hey, wait a minute. I thought you said I was going to do the forward. And I was like, well, you can do the next one, buddy. And but before I sent it to him, I wanted to make sure it was right and something that he would be happy with and proud to do a forward for, because I admire Fred's writing tremendously. I've read his bourbon books, and I remember when I first got into whiskey, my wife bought Bourbon Curious for me. And I read that in 2 sittings, like all within a 24-hour period. And I was just like, man, I'd love to do a bourbon book one day. And here I am, so that was really cool to have, Fred author that forward.
So I agree with everything that Jim said. This book is, it's put together very, very well, very easy read. It has a great flow to it. And, my family grew up in Lawrenceburg. So there's some, pretty cool things that I've been able to talk to different family members about that you talk about in the book, which has been pretty cool for me. A couple of chapters that really stood out to me. The first one is chapter 8, the hacking wild turkey.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, like that chapter just kind of blew my mind. I was reading and I was like, this is awesome. And to see what your thoughts were behind it, I was already captivated, but then it went to a whole nother level when I hit chapter 8. So one of the thoughts that I had was, have you done any blends outside of wild turkey with other brands using, one of the wild turkey expressions that you had, and just testing out some different things there?
I'm constantly playing around with stuff. Like, what would this taste like blended with that? I even did this line last year and the year before of old-fashioned cocktails that were pre-bottled. I even had like a label made. They're not for sale. They would just give them to friends. But so I would blend, I call them the Dirty Bird because it's turkey blended with something else. So I'd find like this good blend and then add bitters and simple syrup and probably make a couple bottles worth and then put them in like 200 milliliter bottles and put a sticker on them. And I had like an old fashioned thing. I'd give it to people for gifts. But yeah, I'm constantly like blending whiskeys together just to see like what they might taste like. And every once in a while, I'll come up with something that's just really works well. Russell's 10-year is a very good whiskey to blend with. If you take Russell's 10-year and you add it to something, more often than not, you're going to end up with something that's interesting at the least, sometimes better than what you started with. For example, I've blended Russell's 10-year with Knob Creek 12 50-50, and that is a wonderful blend. I've done Russell's 10-year with Wilderness Trail Single Barrel Rye, and that's turned out really, really wonderful. I've had a lot of things that didn't turn out so great, but those two right off the top of my head. That chapter was fun because that's kind of playing off Aaron's book, Hacking Whiskey. So I'd mentioned Aaron Goldfarb before. He had written Hacking Whiskey, which he included me in a couple pages of that. But it's fun to take something like a turkey expression like that is a blend of certain ages, like WB Saffel, for example. We knew it was 6, 8, 10, and 12-year-old bourbon. We didn't know percentages and this type of thing. So it was fun at home. I played with that and I came up with something that was about the same proof and tasted a lot like WB Saffel. And I called it WB Hackle. And so I've done stuff like that. It was fun deconstructing Forgiven, which is in that Hacking Whiskey chapter, coming up with that bourbon rye blend at home and side by side tasting it to the actual Forgiven and getting as close as possible to at least batch 303. That was a lot of fun. There's a theme in the book because there's more than one post about that. There's other whiskey blend posts. I'm going to say posts because they were blog posts, but whiskey blend chapters in that book. There's several of them in there. And the point is that you can have fun with whiskey by playing out of bounds. Like you don't have to just open the bottle, pour it and sip it and like it or don't like it. That's one way to do it. But you can do other things with it. I mean, and that's really Aaron's book hacking whiskey is that to the 10th level, is like fat washing and just doing crazy experiments with it, and secondary finishes and home casks and these types of things, syrups and whatnot. So there's a lot of fun to be had with what you've got on hand. You just have to think outside the box.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, David. I've always enjoyed doing blends of my own. I don't always get it right. In fact, more often than not, I don't get it right. But every now and then, I put together something that's exceptional or fun, or certainly something that I enjoy. I've always been a fan of WB Saffel, and I did try your hacking Saffel thing at one point, and I think I got pretty close. I was pretty happy with it. Saffel's a wonderful pour.
It is,
and the 375 kind of catches you a little by surprise because it's a little more expensive for a half bottle, right? But it was nice to play with that and get close, and I was impressed by it. Another thing in the book, I want to talk about your, everything you write is always your truth, right? It's always David Jennings' truth. It's how he feels about a particular subject. But one of the things you did with this book is you did have a fiction article where you kind of talked about
I dabbled in it, didn't I?
You dabbled in it, and I just wonder if you ever had a chance to find out how close you got with that. Maybe you could fill our listeners in a little bit.
I never got the story, which is why I made it up, because I'm like, okay, because how that went down was, I had gotten because this was for, I remember exactly now. So they had that Angels Share charity thing. I may be getting the name wrong, but it was like in 2018, I think. And it was a charity thing that the master distillers went to each other's distilleries and picked barrels, and then they auctioned off the bottles. Or I think you paid like a premium for them or something. And so there was that charity bottle, and it was like Rickhouse B or something like that was the actual charity bottle. So when this master distiller selection showed up at the distillery with I think it was Rickhouse D, all this going from memory. I was like, oh, okay, this is a cool barrel. I wonder why Eddie picked this one. So I sent Eddie a message on Instagram, and I was like, hey, what's the story on this barrel? And he's like, oh, I picked it with Fred and Chris and Jimmy. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought that was the B, for the charity thing. It's like, no, we did that one too. And so I was like, whoa, okay. So I guess they did a couple of them, and then maybe just one went to the charity thing and the other one just went to the distillery or something. So I don't want to bother Eddie. I'm not going to blow up his, I'm not that person. I rarely ever try to message, Eddie. I mean, I can text him if I need to, or email if I need to, but I don't like to be that person. So I just kind of take things like, I got an answer, I'm just going to roll with it, and especially back then. And so I'm like, well, I wonder what that was like and everything. I just got to thinking about it, and I'm like, I'm just going to make up shit. but I'm going to tell people I'm making up shit, and I'm going to have fun doing it. And so that's what that post is. Is just, I mean, I state very clearly that it's fiction, But I had a lot of fun writing that because, it is very much kind of overdone in a way. It's somewhat over dramatized and cartoonish, one might argue, but that was the point. It was to be humorous, it was to kind of, show that Turkey's the best, even when other legends are sitting in the room, and so I'm glad you mentioned that one, because it's complete bullshit, but I had a lot of fun writing it, and I don't write narratives very often. I don't write fiction at all, so that was a fun one to do.
I just wonder if you ever got Chris Morse's take on that.
He probably looked at it and was like, who's this guy? But yeah, I did have fun, and it doesn't really, paint him or Fred in the best light. I mean, it's of course poking fun.
It's poking fun. Yeah,
it's poking fun, and with all due respect to those master distillers who are great in their own right. But it's a turkey blog, so you're going to lose.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was an enjoyable read for me. I mean, Brian got way further in the book than I did, but I enjoyed a couple of things in particular. One was obviously that fiction section there. That was a lot of fun. Also, when you talked about the eras of wild turkey and sort of breaking down the different, kind of the eras that the brand went through and how things changed over time. And, I think about my first experience with wild turkey. And I was living in Ohio, and it was 1981, and I became of age, 18 years old. In Ohio at that time, 18 years got you into a bar. Now, you were only supposed to drink beer at that time at 18. That was the law. But once you're in the bar, they don't care.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. What are you going to do? Yeah.
So I'm drinking some Wild Turkey 8-year 101 from 1981. And that's why I mentioned I have a little bit of that, because that's kind of that was my whiskey, right? That was the one that introduced me to Wild Turkey back in 81. I've sort of put my age on the table there, but...
Well, what's cool is that's in my sentimental whiskey chapter. That's listed as one of my sentimental whiskeys is that 81 Wild Turkey 101. If I'm going from memory correctly,
that's a glut era whiskey, though, according to your era chart, right?
Definitely a glut era whiskey, and it was a time when the barrels were plentiful and the money was not. So,
right, exactly.
And you can taste it, because some of those glut era 8-year bottlings, I mean, there are some that rival some of the 12-year bottlings. I mean, I'm going to be honest, maybe not of the same year, but like that 81 101, I would put it up against like, a mid-90s 101 any day. Just there's just so much going on there. And it's like, I've asked Eddie about it before, because people are always like, well, what makes dusty whiskey or dusty turkey taste like dusty turkey? And they have all kinds of theories about the water and the cypress tanks and the entry proof and all this, and all those theories are not wrong, and they all play a role in it for sure. But as Eddie has stated on more than one occasion, there's just a lot of older whiskey in those bottlings. So, it may say 101 8 years, but it's probably got some like 14-year whiskey in there just because they had to do something with it. It's like, okay, this barrel is going to turn if we don't dump it, so just go ahead and dump it,
And we see that every now and then with just a standard Wild Turkey 101 expression, right? Some older barrels find their way into a particular batch, and the profile moves a little bit, and you get to experience that. Doesn't move a lot, because they're very careful about that, I think, but you get a little movement.
Yeah, I mean, there's variance in the batches for sure. I mean, maybe not month to month or even within a year, but if you start comparing year to year, or maybe every 2 years or every 3 years, you will pick up that there's definitely some batch variance there. Not as much as you would experience in something like a single barrel, where the variance can be extreme even in like the same month. That's the nature of a single barrel. But yes, for sure.
So there's one thing that I would like you to explain to our listeners, because not everybody understands when somebody says Wild Turkey Funk, right? It's a kind of a special thing. But what is Wild Turkey Funk? What's that funk that makes Wild Turkey kind of special, and how has that changed over the years?
When it comes to Wild Turkey Funk, I think there's like multiple definitions, because you can have someone that's never tasted it before, and they taste Wild Turkey 101 for the first time, and they have a hard time kind of putting words to exactly what they're tasting. They'll say, "Oh, there's just something different here." It's like it's kind of funky or something. And then you'll have somebody that maybe tastes something dusty from the 70s and like, wow, this has this crazy funk to it. Or maybe they taste something that's like really hyper aged, like the Bottled and Bond, okay, that you just tasted. And they say, man, this has got this crazy funk to it. And there really is no, like, if you ask Jimmy about Wild Turkey Funk, he's just going to laugh at you. I mean, there's like, he doesn't have any clue what you're talking about with the the wild turkey funk. He's not gonna laugh at you, but he might laugh at the thought of, what is funk, I think that it's multiple things to multiple different people and viewpoints. I can see where someone gets kind of like some barnyard notes maybe in 101 every once in a while, like hay or something like that. And like that's wild turkey funk. Or maybe they're, nosing like an 81 101 like you have, and they get some like fermented fruit notes. And they think, okay, well, this is really funky, or maybe they've gotten this barrel pick that just came out last year or the year before, like maybe one of these E's like I've been sipping on. And they say, wow, this has this weird like fruity funk to it. So I don't think that there is a wild turkey funk like that's the same for everybody. I think it's like depends on the expression and the year it was bottled and how old it was, and there's just so many factors to that. There's dusty funk, and then there's modern whiskey with kind of funky notes to it. But it's hard to nail down exactly a universal definition for wild turkey funk. I think it's just something that sets it apart from other whiskeys is probably the best way to define it. And you have to kind of experience it. You can't explain it. So best I can do on that one.
Well, I think that's good enough for me. I always think of it as this musty oak kind of flavor from the old Dusties, that funk you get. But everybody takes it different.
Yeah, I mean, dusty funk to me is one type of thing. And like if you have a lot of other dusty whiskeys, the dusty funk that you get on wild turkey is very similar to the dusty funk that you get on some other whiskeys too. And what causes that? Tons of different stuff. The water isn't reverse osmosis stuff. They weren't chill filtering. They had cypress tanks. They weren't using automated equipment to kind of make sure everything was exactly the same every time. The grains were different. The oak was different. I mean, so many factors. And like as Eddie has said before, there's a lot of older whiskey going into that stuff. So even unless it's like a bottled and bond and you've locked down the exact, distilled date, bottled date, you could have like a 6-year that has 12-year in it. Who knows? It just depends on the brand and that type of thing. So,
all right, very cool. So I guess if we have a couple more minutes, I guess really it's a good segue to my next question was, chapter 11 and what's a dusty? Like, what is a dusty? And I think you do a great job of kind of walking through that it's not always necessarily a bottle from, 1914.
As with many things in whiskey, there is a lot of room for interpretation. And a lot of it depends on your perspective and when you got started in things. Like I've seen people like they'll find like a bottle, like a 2014 bottle of Wild Turkey 101. Like, look, I found this 101 Dusty. It's like, I mean, Dusty for you. But, when you've had like 70s and 80s Wild Turkey, stuff like that, you don't really look at that like a Dusty. But like if you're just getting into the hobby and all you've had is the latest stuff and you find something from 8 or 9 years ago, to you, that is different. And so it becomes a dusty. It's really hard to nail that kind of stuff down. I tried to in that chapter. I tried to say, okay, well, like I kind of look at things like, was it at least 10 years old? Because like, I feel like it kind of like you start crossing that. If it's sitting in the store for 10 years, we're starting to kind of inch into that dusty territory as in nobody wanted it. And it's just sitting there and it represents a profile from another decade. So at least you can say, well, that's kind of a snapshot of another time because it's a decade ago. So, but even that is not a hard line. It's difficult to kind of like, if you found old granddad from 10 years ago, would you call it dusty old granddad? Probably not, So there's so many factors that, define what a dusty is. And there's people that get mad about it too. There's like, that's not a dusty. And dusty is like 1970s, so-and-so, whatever. And it's like, I mean, but to these people it is. So chill, they haven't had, they just got started in the hobby. They're happy to find something from, years ago. So If they want to call it a Dusty, let them call it a Dusty. But to me, I think that, I look at it like, okay, what's the profile? Is it at least 10 years old? That kind of thing. So, I mean, I've got a Kentucky Spirit from 2015 that tastes like 80s turkey. I ain't joking you. I don't know what the heck happened or what this barrel lived in or what happened, but you can talk to the other people that have had it and picked up the other bottles, and they will swear to you I'm right, that it's from Holmes Liquor in Georgia, and it tastes like Dusty turkey. I don't know how to explain it, but it does.
Well, it's great to have all those listeners out there that are finding these things and shouting out to you and saying, "Oh, check this out!" Right? Or
yeah, oh yeah, it's always fun, and I don't ever poo-poo on anybody's find. Like maybe spiced. If you send me a message and like, "Look what I found," I'm going to be like, okay, but enjoy that, buddy. Yeah, so it's cool. I mean, you find something that's been sitting around on a shelf for a while, especially these days, like, just for something to sit on the shelf for 5 years is kind of an accomplishment. It's probably crap whiskey, but maybe not. Maybe you really lucked out and found something cool that's been sitting there for 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
well, David, we could talk to you for hours.
It's always fun.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's not reasonable for a podcast episode, right? I mean, we can only hold their attention for so long.
I got hungry kids, man. I got hungry kids.
But we really enjoyed it. We always love having you on the show. It's a great time. You've got so much going on. We didn't touch on all the things you're doing, but you're killing it out there.
Oh, thank you, man.
Constantly killing it, and more than anything, I think it's fair to note how real you are.
Oh, man, appreciate that.
In your opinions and in the words that you write, and certainly in the books that you put out. You don't get much more real than DJ David Jennings, RareBird101.
Well, thank you. I do have a lot of stuff in the works, and I can't wait to share on episode 4.
Awesome. Great. Well, we would like you to take just a minute here, if you have time, and just let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can get your book, where they can find out more about your blog and your Patreon and all the things you do have immediately going on. And we'll definitely have you back again for sure.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to find my blog, it's at RareBird101.com. You'll find plenty of wild turkey reviews there, articles about wild turkey and my travels doing barrel picks and various wild turkey related events. And as well as news, press releases, these types of things. For more information about my books, you can go to wildturkeybook.com. There are links there to purchase the books in e-format and in print. And if you're interested in supporting my writing, you can go to patreon.com/RareBird101. As I've mentioned before, I do barrel picks, and those barrel picks, while they sometimes go public, they usually sell out with my Patreon supporters first because they're notified first. So check that out again, patreon.com/RareBird101. And thank you, Brian and Jim, for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I always enjoy doing the Bourbon Road podcast. Good show here.
Awesome, David. Well, we really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule, from your kids and your dogs and everything else you have going on. Life is real, right? We all have other things.
Man, I tell you what, it's been crazy. For any listeners, if you heard some background noise, that's life, man.
It's always a blast to have you on the show. Anytime you're in Kentucky, look us up. We'd love to have a pour with you. It's always fun to sit down and sip on a few wild turkey expressions and talk about this particular brand and the detail that you're able to take us through. It's always a journey. We always enjoy it. David, you've been on the show 3 times now. I think we've got one other guest that's ahead of you. Ashley Barnes, I think, has been on 4 times, but one of you will hit number 5 first. I'm not sure who it'll be, but
we'll get there. We'll get there.
It's always a blast to have you on. We wish you all the luck in the world with your new book and everything you have going on. We'll be shouting to the stars, everything you have going on, because we really enjoy having you around. David, thank you again for being on the Bourbon Road.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right, listeners. Well, we thank you for sticking around for a little bit longer than normal episode with David Jennings from RareBird101. Brian and I had an awesome time sitting down with him and drinking through a number of wild turkey expressions. It's been a blast. It's actually been phenomenal reading through his latest book. If you get a chance to order Wild Turkey Musings, I definitely suggest you do it. David mentioned on the show how you can get with his publisher and order a copy of that book to get it shipped out immediately. If you don't mind the wait, you can always go to Amazon.com, search for David Jennings or Wild Turkey Musings and put it on pre-order. You won't get it till February, but hey, you'll still get it anyway. It's a great read. Maybe when it comes in, you could pour yourself a nice Wild Turkey 101 and just sit back and enjoy a nice read. You can find the Bourbon Road on all social medias. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. You can find us on the internet on our website, thebourbonroad.com. You can also find us on our private Facebook group, The Bourbon Roadies. It's about 3,000 of our wonderful listeners who really find it enjoyable to revisit our podcast and listen from time to time. They love to go into the group and talk about bourbon, talk about the podcast episodes. More importantly, they love to share whiskey amongst each other. Sharing pours of your favorite bourbon, as we talked about in this episode, is something special. We all love to do it. We'd love to have you be a Bourbon Roadie. It's real easy. Just get onto Facebook, search The Bourbon Roadies. A private group link will come up. Click on it, join, answer a few questions, and come on in. We will welcome you with open arms. We do a show every single week. We'll have a guest on. Brian and I will drink through a number of expressions. Sometimes we'll have an author, or sometimes a musician, or sometimes a master distiller, somebody in the industry that's making news and making it happen. We love to have them on the show. We hope you listen to our show every single week. The way to make sure you don't miss one is to go onto that podcast app you're listening to us on right now and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, that plus button, that remind me button, whatever button is coming up in your podcast. Make sure you set it to remind you when a podcast is coming out, and you'll get that ding notification to let you know that us two jokers have another show coming out. We hope you enjoy it. You can always reach out to us on our website. That's where we prefer. You can send us emails also. You can send an email to team@thebourbonroad.com. Brian and I both get it. We'll be happy to respond. If you've got an idea for a bottle or a guest on the show, we get them all the time. We'll definitely take it from there. Every single week, we hope you come into our bar, come into our studio, listen to what we have going on. We always have a blast doing it. But until next time, we'll see you on down the Bourbon Road.